Welcome to the Body and Beyond podcast with Alice and Gina,
a podcast sparking discussion on all things health, mindset, fitness, goals, and motivation.
We strive to help you to boost your confidence, to take the lead in your own life, to back yourself, and to step into your full potential. Body and Beyond is proudly sponsored by The Seed Cycle. The Seed Cycle is a beautiful female-founded Australian company. Seed cycling is a natural methodology that you can use to support your menstruation and your ovulation, and it can even be used to support your hormones through perimenopause and menopause. Use the code BODYANDBEYOND at the Seed Cycle website www.theseedcycle.com.au.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. Welcome to our episode today with a very special guest, Dr. Yvonne Burkart. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm doing amazing. How are you guys?
Yeah, really good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, pleasure. We are very excited today to chat about everything to do with toxicology, because you are a toxicologist, I believe. So I guess to kick off the episode, we would love to have an intro from you. What do you do? What is your background? Tell us a little about what toxicology is.
Perfect. I would love to. Thank you so much. So I'm a toxicologist, a board certified toxicologist, which means that I'm a chemical and ingredient safety expert. I have expertise in reproductive toxicology as well as in flavor and fragrance chemicals and consumer products. So it is really my purpose and my goal to educate as many people as I can about the harmful toxic chemicals in our everyday products so that we can protect our health and ultimately live healthier. I'm also a mom of two, and I'm extremely passionate about helping parents in particular to protect their children.
Yeah, amazing. And how long have you been studying toxicology?
Ooh, I'm about to feel really old right now, but it's going on 22 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And because obviously that's your specialty, that's your degrees. When did you first get interested in this topic as a whole?
I actually found it by accident. So I was in college looking for a summer job in the university, and I saw an ad listed for a lab assistant. So I just applied, and then the job that I got hired for was in a toxicology lab. And it was from there that I just started watching, observing, and I got so obsessed with what they were doing in this lab. And I also just loved it because they were working on ovarian cancer, and the professor was a woman, and I just really wanted to advocate for women's health, and I wanted to somehow help women in terms of reproduction, cancer, and just overall women's health. I've always been about women's health.
Yeah, amazing. And that's the thing, right? So many of our, what we expose ourselves to, our products, what we consume, they're all affecting our hormones, they're affecting our fertility, our wellness, our skin. Yeah, so...
What I really love about you, Yvonne, as well, is that, from your profile and what the information you give out, you're very coming from an angle of trying to inform people so that they are not, they don't have to feel anxious about it, right? Or feel stressed about it. Because when you think about it, and this has happened to me when I've sort of started to become more aware of these things, you almost start to think like, oh my gosh, like how do I get away from all this stuff? Like, this is impossible. And you start to kind of stress about all of the, possible chemicals, hormone disrupting chemicals or toxic sort of things around you as a whole. It can become like, it can make you quite anxious, right? So what I love is that, from your angle and what you do on your page is very like, reassuring to people that you don't have to stress about it. Here is the knowledge, and here are the ways that you can, just make small changes to be more aware and make a huge difference, I guess, those small changes, right?
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for mentioning that. That is one of the angles that I definitely want to emphasize, especially if you're new. If you've never heard about toxic chemicals in your environment and your products, it can be quite a shock, especially if you have grown up using certain brands and you're shocked to find out that they might not be as safe as that we're told. So I
Mhm.
totally understand that. And oftentimes I think it's first a mindset shift. So being able to just calm down and know that slow and small, steady changes over a long period of time can really make a huge difference in our toxic exposure over a lifetime. Because it's really about what we're exposed to over the long term, not just the short term.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
Mm.
So should we kick off and sort of dive into hormone disrupting chemicals? Maybe you can explain a little about what that is to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have endocrine glands in our body. There are 8 of them, and they basically regulate every function from sleeping, digestion, metabolism, cognition, reproduction, so much more, as well as stress response. And basically, hormones are how our body reacts to stimuli from our outside environment and how it regulates itself, basically. So, hormone disrupting chemicals are chemicals that are usually man made or they can be naturally occurring, but they basically throw off the balance of our body's natural hormones. And the problem with endocrine disruptors is that they are everywhere. So, they're pretty much unavoidable, which may sound scary at first, but I don't want anyone to feel afraid because they're already there. So, the key is now to avoid as many of them as we possibly can. And so that's really going to make the biggest difference in your health. So, one of the things that I like to tell people is just think of it that our hormones are in such small amounts in our body. It's equivalent to a single drop of water in an Olympic sized swimming pool. So, even if you have one more drop, which we don't know exactly how much that is when it comes from our environment, we don't know exactly how much that is. But if we do get one more drop, that's already double the amount that we actually need. And hormones stimulate cell growth, especially hormones like estrogen. They stimulate breast tissue growth and in our uterus. And so we can get cancer that way as well. So it's not just that they throw off our hormones, but they also can cause long term, really big problems like cancer.
Mm.
Mhm. So when it comes to hormone disrupting chemicals, then would that could you give us a couple of examples, I guess, of where we would find those in everyday things?
Yeah, yes, I said they're everywhere, but again, slow, small changes, you can definitely avoid them. One big area are plastics. So
Mhm.
plasticizer chemicals like phthalates that help to make the plastic more malleable so that they can become more flexible and soft, for example, which is how plastic is made. BPA is one as well. Both of these affect the estrogen balance in our body. The problem is that some of them are more potent and strong than others. Some of them last longer in our bodies than others. And so key is to really avoid as many of them as you can, because again, we don't know exactly how much we're getting in our bodies. Although there are now tests that have been developed that you can test yourself, but it really doesn't matter to test yourself if you're not actively trying to avoid them in the first place, right? Because those
Mhm.
levels can change. So plastics are a huge source. Another one are nonstick cookware. Though the chemicals there are called PFAS. The problem with those is that they accumulate in our bodies because they take forever to break down. They're called forever chemicals. So that's really the 2 main that we see often as well. So PFAS are found in cookware as well as takeout food containers and fast food containers, popcorn bags, so many consumer products. Makeup is definitely a big one. Waterproof makeup. So anything that has a waterproof or non-stick finish, stain guard, wrinkle-free clothing as well, rain gear. So anything that's like water repellent, you might want to look out for that.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Myself have started looking at the cookware only recently. Bottles I have done a while ago. The discarding of all the plastic bottles, because I am someone who always has a water bottle with me wherever I go. I'm always drinking a lot of water. So I've got my either glass bottles if I can, or a stainless steel bottle. But I think the cookware, it surprised me as well that it is written on the labels as well, right? Same as the BPA label on most products anyway. So I noticed that some pans do have, they do say they're free of those things, whereas others don't. So
Yeah, that's a really good point because sometimes it'll show up on the label and other times it won't. So that's where it kind of gets a little bit tricky. But when you start to recognize the types of products that don't have these chemicals in them, then you can just kind of go for those. So you kind of just basically want to start looking at other options. Even if it's just a little bit different than, let's say, a nonstick Teflon coated pan, that's at least an improvement. So it's just like little bits here and there. It's really going to add up over time.
And you mentioned that these chemicals can affect like the cells, like our hormones and our cells. But in layman's terms, what's the effect of that? Like what ends up happening?
Oh, really great question. Thank you so much. I did get pretty geeky on you there in terms of what hormones do and everything like that. But some of the effects that you can see, as I mentioned, are cancer, reproductive disorders. I'll start there. So PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis as well, infertility and miscarriage, as well as sperm disorders. So it can really translate into poor sperm quality, low sperm count. So it's not just women who are affected. Men are also affected. So that's oftentimes a misunderstanding that men don't feel like they're being affected as well, that they don't need to pay attention to this. But it's showing up in the male population. So we definitely need to pay attention, especially for young children, because kids cannot detoxify as efficiently as an adult. So we got to really help kids to avoid these chemicals as much as possible, because early exposure can result in lifelong health issues. So when it comes to cognitive and behavioral disorders, there's ADHD. You can actually have ADHD that's connected with hormone disruption, as well as, of course, obesity and diabetes, right? So having our bodies, like making our bodies store more fat. They're called, the scientific term is obesogens, because it's promoting obesity.
Oh, really? I did not know that was a term. Wow. And which ones specifically contain obesogens or affect that?
BPA for sure, bisphenol A, as well as phthalates and PFAS, all of them. So the crazy thing is they kind of overlap, right? So the PFAS stay in our bodies forever. They stay in our bodies for many, many years. It takes a long time for them to break down, and they're pretty much everywhere. So it's unavoidable now. But again, just focusing on avoiding as much as you can. Just do what you can and leave the rest. And then with the phthalates, they're also pretty much everywhere because they're used in cosmetics. So nail polish, hairspray. So anything that needs a flexible hold, hair gel, those kind of things can have phthalates in them, because that's what they do. And they're also really prevalent in fragrances. So anytime you see the word fragrance on your ingredients list, it's almost guaranteed that there are phthalates in there. It works as a fixative. So it helps for the scent to last longer and even can increase the pungency of the smell.
So fragrance free is the way to go.
That's right. So unscented is, so fragrance free and unscented, it can get kind of confusing, but yeah, try to go for as least scented options as you can.
I'm really keen to go down that path as well for alternatives to perfume. So I reckon we should do that a bit later. I was really curious as well. What are the effects on young women? So for example, I say young women, really meaning girls, like young girls. And have you noticed any correlations in your research between like young women and getting their periods earlier, or starting to come into puberty earlier, or anything like that?
100%. So there are definitely human studies now. So it's called epidemiological studies. So basically looking at groups of people, and they've specifically studied groups of young girls. Several studies have taken place. One of them looks specifically at the hormone disruptors coming from personal care products. So lipstick, deodorant, makeup as well, toothpaste, body lotion, shampoo, all of those products that they tested and had the girls basically switch to products that don't have those ingredients in them. And within 3 days, the amount of hormone disruptors, phthalates specifically, in their blood dropped by 35%. So it's a really, really good sign, because it means that our bodies are quickly metabolizing it. And so they're not hanging around causing long-term damage. So as soon as you start switching, you can start to see improvement. So when it comes to the symptoms or the disorders that they've observed, they've seen early breast development and early puberty in these young girls. So once they stopped using the products, then the blood levels dropped, but the process of puberty has already taken place. So the key is to really protect the kids before that happens. Ideally, even before they're born, ideally before preconception. So that once you have conceived, then your body is as clean of a vessel as possible for your child to grow in.
Yeah. Wow. I find that really interesting because I feel like I've had conversations before about, young women getting their period a lot earlier these days than, say, what might have been the case for my parents and for me when I went through school, and that kind of seeing a bit of a trend of just, kind of getting earlier and earlier in some stages. So I find that quite interesting that you mentioned that. It kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, because personal care product use has skyrocketed
Yeah.
probably in the last 20 years or so. There's been a huge growth in the industry, and these ingredients are not fully tested. Many of them are not tested before they go to market, especially in the US. It's not required to do pre-market testing. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, regulates cosmetics as well, and they don't require companies to do pre-market testing like they do in Europe. So it can get kind of hairy because in the US, the personal care and cosmetics industry self-regulates. So there are scientists and toxicologists like me that work in the industry to try to help make products safer and to ensure that there's minimal amounts of, toxic ingredients, but there's still so much left to do because clearly the health effects are compounding. They're showing up more and more every day. Like you said, girls are maturing much earlier. I've seen and heard about breast development in 7 and 8 year olds, which is pretty alarming.
Yeah. Wow.
It
And
is.
as far as I know, this is also something to consider with period products too, tampons, pads, liners, and that sort of thing, as far as I know. Do you have any recommendations around that?
Definitely. So let me just back up and explain what are the issues with personal care products in terms of the period products specifically. So a lot of them are bleached. They can contain petroleum-derived ingredients. And what happens is during the bleaching process, you get formation of these chemicals called dioxins. These are also very estrogen-like. And so if you can imagine a tampon that's been bleached and you're putting these dioxins directly into the vagina, there's a lot of blood flow there, very thin membranes. So you can get a significant amount of absorption through the vaginal canal if you're using a conventional tampon or pad for that matter, because even though the pad is not inserted directly, it's still coming in contact. So what I recommend is to look for organic cotton period panties if you can find them. Be on the lookout because some of the period panties were shown to be contaminated with the PFAS chemicals, the ones that make it waterproof. So just be on the lookout for that. Look for organic cotton, like the more natural fibers will be your best bet. That's one example, or a silicone menstrual cup. And try to look for one that is medical grade silicone. And that should help. But I understand if you're just starting out and maybe you're kind of nervous to make the switch from a tampon to a menstrual cup, you can still use a pad, just to catch any leakage or overflow. I definitely did that when I switched. And once you get used to it and you find the right size, it just becomes second nature. And the best feeling in the world is not throwing a bunch of tampons and pads in the trash. That's the best feeling.
That's a whole nother conversation, right? Like the
Right.
effect that the waste products, even the plastics, like the more we use the plastics, the more rubbish we're creating. So there's that other benefit for the environment.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's massive. And do you think there's any correlation as well to getting really painful periods for young women? And obviously as women get in their 20s and 30s and so on, but really painful periods?
Yeah, that can definitely be associated, right? So with endometriosis, I know there's a lot of pain involved. So definitely, because endometriosis has been linked to hormone disruptors as well. So it's not a surprise necessarily. So the more and more we can reduce our estrogen load and open up our natural detox pathways. So we have detoxification organs like the liver and the kidneys and the gut. So we're naturally detoxifying 24/7. But when our bodies become burdened and overloaded, then we're not able to detoxify the estrogens as efficiently. And so they end up getting recirculated. And so you get what it's called an estrogen dominance. So you have too much estrogen floating around in your body, and then you're getting more estrogens, let's say from your personal care products, your tampons and all of those things, plastics in your food. So you can see how this is really starting to build up in your body. So you got to make sure that you are drinking water, you're pooping regularly, because a lot of estrogen is actually released through the feces, and making sure that your liver and your kidneys are functioning properly.
Yeah,
When
cool.
you
I was
say-
going to actually ask, how's it all excreted? Is it excreted through breath and sweat and wee and poo, or how else?
All the above.
Yeah,
All the
okay.
above. Yeah. So like the hormone disrupting chemicals, they're definitely excreted quickly. Some of them quickly in the urine, and then most of them end up in the feces. So if you're not pooping, then it's like literally sitting inside your body, and things can get reabsorbed through the colon and just keep kind of circulating. And then it's like not really going anywhere. And then, you start getting all these symptoms, right?
And it's
That's
such
why
a
it's so
compound.
important as well to have enough fiber in our diets as well. Hey, Al, because I think, especially when women and men start to pay more attention to their nutrition and start to eat a higher fiber diet, then they'll go more regularly, which is fantastic for the system, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because some fibers, actually like raw carrots, can bind estrogen as well. So like you said, just eating a more whole foods diet, balanced nutrition, not stressing too, because cortisol can actually contribute to that as well, to painful periods and such. So, and PMS, all of those things kind of tie into hormones.
Wow. And you mentioned drinking water before. Can we go into the subject of water itself, tap water? I know it might be different in the US versus Australia, but what do we know about the tap water when it comes to chemicals?
Tap water, for the most part, can have a huge number of contaminants in it. So contaminants like heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic has been detected. Also, whenever it's chlorinated to disinfect, you get these disinfection byproduct chemicals that are formed because of the other chemicals that were already in the water. They reacted with the chlorine. So you're getting those bad guys. You're getting the PFAS, the Teflon-like chemicals, because they're just everywhere in the environment. So they end up in our water. And then, you just get pharmaceuticals, you get hormones, pesticides. I mean, you name it. There's so much stuff in tap water. Like you said, I don't know about what's happening in Australia, but definitely in the US, there are issues with the water. So I don't recommend drinking tap water unless you are really desperate.
It's such a big, obviously it would be huge for the US or Australia to go off tap water, right? But from a government perspective, why is this stuff in the water? Like, why is this happening? Why, obviously that's not necessarily a question for you, but how come it's almost like not more common knowledge that this stuff's in there?
Yeah, to be honest, I think it really takes somebody to take the next step and look at the water report, because every municipality, so far as I know, publishes a water report, and it tells you about the contaminants, the dissolved particles. You can look at all the levels. And actually, I was pretty shocked when I looked at my water report. There was a high level of arsenic, and I thought, thank goodness I've got multiple filters. So if you can't afford to drink bottled water is already problematic in and of itself because of the plastic. Definitely go for a water filtration system, a water filter, at least one of those pitchers, something that's going to take at least anything out of your water. Even if you can't afford the top of the line, any improvement is an improvement. That's what I like to think about it.
Yeah.
I've been buying some water in the almost I don't think you guys know this word in America, but goon. Do you know goon?
No,
it's like
what is
cheap
that?
wine in Australia, like goon bags. Anyway, you can buy water from the supermarket in boxes, basically cardboard boxes, which is better for the environment. But then the actual water is contained inside of I don't know, it's not aluminium, but it's silver. Do you know what kind of bag that would be?
Like a pouch?
Like a pouch. Yeah, sure.
Oh,
but more
well,
like a goon bag for those Aussies listening.
Goon bag. Okay. I'm going to have to Google this.
Yeah. But what is, I guess there'd still be some sort of plastic in there, right, to contain the liquid, but
yeah, exactly. So even though it's less plastic than maybe you get in a jug or something, because it's not as hard and thick, it's still plastic. So if you can get yourself a water filter at home, then you can avoid the plastic altogether.
Yeah.
But make sure your filter can take away the PFAS, because that's one that's kind of more new recent developments that people have like been noticing a lot of PFAS in the water. So highly recommend at least checking that your filter manufacturer says they can take out the PFAS chemicals.
Mhm. Okay, great tip.
What else? I was really curious to hear your take on the effects that microwaving food in plastic, like what actually happens in the microwave when food is warmed up in plastic compared to, say, a glass or another type of dish.
Right. Okay, so microwaving in general just heats up the food from the inside because it makes the water kind of boil off. And so that's how you get the food to get hot. When it's in plastic, you're actually breaking down the plastic and it's going into your food. So basically plastic, when it breaks down, it depends on several variables. So like, for example, the temperature. So if you're heating it, then you're going to get more leaching and migration. If you are putting it in the sun, UV can break it down as well. But just to stick with the microwave aspect of it, you're just literally heating the plastic and it's melting into your food.
Yeah. And I think this
So
is really important because a lot of people nowadays do get ready-made meal prep, and some of those come with vacuum sealed plastic covering. And although, sometimes you might not be in a situation where you can, but for myself, I'll always remove that and then put the meal in a bowl to heat it rather than heating it in, if I can, if I'm at home or if I'm somewhere where I've got a bowl that I can eat out of. So definitely recommend that for our listeners, because I know a lot of our listeners do sometimes get sort of like ready-made type meals to eat on the go.
And also just quickly, like a lot of people as well, especially our listeners, would be doing meal prep as well. So they're cooking bulk meals and putting them into containers. So again, recommending that everyone heats up in glass or heats up in bowls. But what's the difference between, how you've got like the more harder, high quality plastic containers like Tupperware or whatever that from the supermarket or actual Tupperware brand, but then you've got those really cheap, flimsy plastic containers that are typically from, the Chinese shop when you get takeaway, the difference. So could you go through the difference in like how potentially the Chinese container is maybe less stable, like it breaks down more, or what's the difference in those plastics?
I think it has a lot to do. This is a really great question. I think it has a lot to do with the flexibility. So like you said, the ones from the Chinese restaurants or the takeaway foods, they're typically pretty soft, right? So ideally, if you can, transfer your food out of there as quickly as possible. And so I'm a little bit extra when it comes to this, but I've heard of other people and myself as well bringing glass containers. I keep them in the trunk of my car. If I was to have food that I'm taking home from a restaurant, then I'll use that instead. So not only am I saving plastic from going into the landfill, but I'm also saving myself from getting the plastic in my food. So that's one way, but definitely the differences would have to do with the flexibility. So some hard plastics, it really depends. So if you look at your plastic, there's a number on it. At least in the US, I'm pretty sure it's like this worldwide, but there's a number on it that tells you what type of plastic. Some plastics actually don't leach the same plasticizers like BPA or anything like that. It's only certain types of plastics that still use BPA.
And
so yeah, that's a good point.
When it comes to people like putting those like flimsy plastics in the microwave, that's even worse, is it? But then the ones that are more the firm plastics that say BPA free, and they're trying to be better, but they're still plastic, right?
Exactly. So plastic is still plastic. Some plastic is worse than others, but it's still plastic at the end of the day. So if you can avoid it, great. If you can't, don't freak out. Try your best next time.
Yeah. It's all about little steps. Yes.
Yeah.
Another one that we wanted to bring up was the root canals and dentistry, and specifically, about, I think what they used to use also in probably back in older days than now. I think they've changed. I think sometimes they've changed what they use for fillings and that sort of thing as well. But did you know much about that?
Yeah. So, well, in terms of fillings, let me just touch on that. They used to use amalgam, which is mercury. That's pretty much generally on its way out. But people like me, I still had them in my teeth until a couple years ago. So you have to get them safely removed and make sure you go to a dentist that knows how to remove it so that you don't get a bunch of mercury in your body when they're taking them out. So that's number one. When it comes to root canals, The type of material that they use to fill in the root system, it really depends on what the chemicals are. So most dental, how do I say, dental substances or whatever they use in dentistry, they do have some toxic issues because they either are having some kind of plastic in there, or they have to get hardened and like fixed with UV light, cured is what they call it, I think. So they have solvents and different chemicals in there, but oral health is important, right? So if you need a filling, get the filling, try to avoid the amalgam. If you need a root canal, I have a personal take on that. I've had 2 root canal teeth recently removed as of January of this year. I went to a biological dentist. I don't know what it's called in Australia, but if you can Google it, I'm sure you can find something.
I think they're
similar.
called holistic dentists.
Okay.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully start there and see if you can find, if you're on the verge of needing a root canal, I would highly recommend seeking out a holistic dentist, because root canals have been proven time and time again to harbor pathogenic bacteria, harmful bacteria. So active infections. I had one since I was a teenager. And so basically I'm now in my 40s. So close to 30 years, 20 something years, I had one. And then I had one a few years ago that got root canal. And that one just continued to cause me problems. So I went to this holistic biological dentist. They did a test to find out what types of bacteria are in there. And shockingly, there were so many. It was like major red flags, active infections. So as soon as I took those teeth out, within a couple days, my skin cleared up. I got dental implants. So I got zirconium implants. Zirconium is safer than titanium, because titanium is often used in place of a tooth, but the metal in and of itself has problems. So if you can go for zirconium, it's safer from the research that I've done and from what I've learned from the dentist. So long story short, a lot of things have improved in my health since I took those teeth out. So if you can avoid a root canal, highly recommend it. It's just so much more pain than it's worth from my personal experience. If you've got a tooth that needs it, just have it pulled out. If you can afford to go for an implant, cool. If you can't, some dentists will tell you that you don't even need an implant. It just depends on where your tooth is. So mine are kind of like here on the side that you can see them when I smile. So it was more for aesthetic reasons that I got it. But nonetheless, yeah, some people, if it's in the back teeth, you don't need to get an implant. You can just have that tooth removed. But it's really up to you and your dentist. At the end of the day, root canals can cause a lot more issues, not just from the chemicals that are coming from the root canal materials, but from the infections that are there.
This is so relevant for me right now. Yeah. So I've had root canals probably through a few teeth, same as you, since I was a teenager, unfortunately. And yeah, one in particular has been an issue, and I've done some research, and yeah, essentially there's this whole line of thinking where you literally got this dead bone sitting in your head, trying to save it, but it's actually not, it's not connected to the nerve supply. It's not plumbed in. Basically, it's not actually a living organ anymore, a living tissue. So it's actually just, people feel good about keeping their tooth and doing a root canal rather than pulling out the tooth, so they feel good because they've still got their tooth. Definitely my experience as well. But really, like you said, the bacteria or the infection can be so tiny, but what it's going into our bloodstream, isn't it? Like it's going into our system. So
100%. I used to have some joint pain, autoimmune issues now that I can trace back to these root canal teeth. And once I took them out, I don't have the joint pain anymore, and I can exercise like I used to. It's like pretty shocking in just a few short months to see so much improvement in my health, because my body isn't actively trying to fight this infection that it was literally causing me pain right here on my cheek. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's really deep. And when the dentist went in, he said, yeah, that's a big infection. Even though your tooth is technically dead, it's not dead. It's just this petri dish for all of these terrible bacteria.
Totally. And that's the thing, sometimes aesthetically or from the outside, like no one can tell you've got this infection, but like systemically on the inside. And that's crazy if it's affecting the immune system and people are having an immune response. And then that could, I don't know, turn into even worse immune issues, right? But
100%.
People shrug it off because it's like, oh, my tooth, it's got a root canal and it's a little bit sore, but it's fine. It's such a minor.
Yeah, I think it's become so normalized in our culture and our society to just accept root canals as such, because that's just the thing that that, is taught in dentistry. But from what I've learned is it's nearly impossible to completely fill in the root system because it's essentially like a tree inside your tooth, a microscopic tree. So
Yeah.
if you can imagine even one of those little branches in there, if there are some bacteria, they can just keep growing.
Mm.
So it's like it's a double-edged sword. Like most root canals fail, which is pretty sad. But again, when you can do better. And again, also you don't have to freak out about it. As soon as you can get them out, the better. But the goal is, I guess, to keep ourselves from stressing about these things, because the stress can also do a lot of damage to our bodies. But you did bring up something really good I want to touch on that I didn't even talk about when you were asking me about the effects of hormone disruptors. Immune suppression is one of them. So they can actually affect our ability to fight infections, and they can affect the body's like immune response when you get a vaccination. So if you've got a lot of, there's so many things that these chemicals do. So really, if there was anything that I could ever recommend to people is try to avoid these hormone disruptors as much as you can.
I feel like, and you said something just before about things becoming more accepted in today's society. And I personally feel like there's a lot that's becoming just accepted as bad luck, you got this, or you've got this autoimmune, so what, like there's nothing, we could never figure out what it is, you just have to deal with it, or so many health issues, right? And so it can be quite I guess nerve-wracking to think about all of the things that could potentially be contributing over the long term, but I think it's really important to remind people that although a lot of these things, or a lot of these health issues, I feel have become very almost normalized in this day and age, I think it's also important to keep in mind that like there is always a root cause somewhere going on, right? And so if you can be aware of all of these little things in your everyday practice and the small things, that can compound into a huge effect later in life, right? So, and like you said, it's not something like, having heating up something in a plastic container today, but if you're doing that multiple times every single day for 10 years in your office or 20 years in your office, like as your daily routine, then it's going to be a huge difference. So and those little things can potentially be, those tiny little things over time can potentially be those things that lead to issues to which people nowadays just go, oh, well, it could be a million things, bad luck. It's just, you just got to deal with it. So I feel like this is, for me as well, very kind of eye-opening in that if you just make those small switches, small changes every day, it can really make a huge effect. Yeah,
Definitely. Even if you just switch, like you said, switch out your water bottle. Just think of how many plastic bottles you are saving from the landfill, right? Because plastic goes into the environment. Not only do the chemicals leach, but the plastic breaks down and becomes microplastics. And then we're ingesting them through the food supply. They're in fish. They're also in water. They're also in the air. We can breathe them in. So, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can just make these little tweaks.
Yeah.
You don't have to do all at once. I don't even recommend doing it all at once because it can be such a shock to your system. Because when I first learned about this stuff and I had issues, I had a miscarriage, I had infertility, and I was really freaking out. I went 100% crunchy, which means like I dumped all my products and went full hippie. Just was a nightmare. I mean, the products that I found were, I used a shampoo. They called it a shampoo, but it was essentially like a mud type of product. Terrible. It smelled bad. Like I just couldn't, it didn't fit with what I was looking for in terms of a shampoo. And I just smelled terrible. And it even though maybe I didn't get the hormone disruptors, it just wasn't working for me. I couldn't live my life like that. So I just had to, you can find your own balance. Whatever that looks like for you can be totally different from anyone else. And hey, good for you if you can go full crunchy. I couldn't do it myself, but hey, if you can do it, hats off to you.
I haven't heard that term before. Is that like hippie, like, or go fully committed to the cause?
Yeah, like crunchy, hippie. I don't know how else to describe it. Just 100% natural, everything natural.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that.
I'm actually struggling with is my deodorant, because I have tried to do the switch there with like an aluminium free. And well, I probably need to shop around a little, I guess, but definitely feeling like the ones that I have tried yeah, sometimes I go to the gym and I'm like, I don't know if that deodorant's doing anything for me.
But you know what's
find
really,
that you
yeah,
only-
that's a good point. So
Sorry, Yvonne.
what I found, no worries. So what I found is actually if you switch to a natural, aluminum-free deodorant, there can be a detox phase or an adjustment period that your body's trying to rebalance itself because you have a microbiome in your armpits too. And so when you're using these aluminum ones, that they actually block the sweat duct, so you're not perspiring. And perspiration is one of the detox pathways as well. And I know if you're working out, like you're probably sweating in other areas, but it can be helpful to sweat, and hopefully you don't sweat too badly. But if you do a armpit detox, if you get like a charcoal or a clay armpit detox, can actually help. I've heard. I didn't do it. I just actually went cold turkey and stopped using deodorant. And thankfully, I didn't smell bad enough that my husband ran away. So I think I'm lucky in that regard, but definitely just try it out. If you look up armpit detox, that might help you.
Thank you.
That's a really good point as well. I find, I don't know about you guys, but I find that typically I'll only be smelly at certain times of the month, like around ovulation sort of time. So, and other than that, I don't really wear a lot of deodorant actually, come to think of it, but then it's just those times I'm like, oh, that stinks. But it's interesting, hey, because it makes sense if our body adapts or it's used to a certain like chemical or certain blockage or barrier that it would, have to go through that. So
I think it's almost like a bit of just a personal fear as well, because you don't ever want to be that person in the gym where everyone's like having to stay like a 1 kilometer radius around you. And so every time I've tried to kind of go, no, I'm not going to use that deodorant, or I'll just use nothing, or I'll use something. It's kind of like, oh my God, do I smell? Like, I don't know. It's just something that I'm currently in the midst of changing over though. So like you said, I think I just need to do some research and probably just detox my armpits.
Yeah, to be honest, I've heard of that. I didn't do it myself, but I think it just naturally happened because I stopped using those products. But more like you said, that's really interesting. Certain times of your cycle, you might notice a different smell. Maybe the pheromones are coming out. I don't know.
Exactly. Like it has a purpose, right? Because it's pheromones.
Yeah.
Like if you're ready for for to be fertilized, essentially. I was like, what's the way to say this? Like essentially, it's the pheromones, and just not as accepted in this day and age, but I'm sure back in the day it was very sexy.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Well, on the topic of that, could we dive back into perfumes before we kind of finish up? Because I am really interested in an alternative, because I love perfumes and I am that girl who loves to, I've got a different perfume for whatever kind of date night feel I've got going on. So for me, like giving the perfume up or maybe reducing it, I don't know. I'm not sure what the options are.
Oh, I can totally tell you about this. I recently ran a low tox perfume workshop because I get this question all the time. I have so many people that are like, I can't give up perfume. It's part of my culture for some reasons, or people have, or I need it to feel a certain way when I go out. That's totally fine. And I get you. There are low tox options for those who love perfume. And what I recommend going for are essential oil based perfumes. There's actually a brand that I discovered. It's Australian, called Recreation Bondi Beach. Pretty sure that's
Australian.
the brand.
Of course it's got Bondi Beach in
it. I'm pretty sure that's the
Recreation Beauty, natural perfume.
There you go.
There
you found it super quick. So I don't know how well they function, but I've seen some reviews and they looked positive. So if you wanted to give that a try, the other thing that I could recommend to you is not spraying it directly on your skin, especially around your head. So a lot of us will spray it on the neck, or I used to do this thing where I sprayed a whole cloud like a plume and would walk through it. So I would get a nice even coating on me. Which kind of like makes me cringe now. But what I would recommend is actually spraying it on your clothes.
Yeah.
So that you can still smell it, but it's not on your skin. Or if you can't find one that you like, that, for example, if you don't like the one that I suggested, if it doesn't work for you, you can still use your regular one. Just try to space it out. I know some people use quite a lot, and you'll notice that once you stop using a lot of fragrance and scented products, you become more sensitive to these smells, to where the amount that you used to use is so overwhelming and overpowering. That's what happened to me. And I hear it all the time too. People say the same thing, like, oh my gosh, I can't stand the smell. Sometimes it's so overpowering. It's almost like our sensory, our olfactory system is kind of overloaded. And so it becomes desensitized. And so once you kind of remove that fragrance and scents, your body can kind of normalize and you can actually smell a lot more than you think.
Wow.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've also covered this throughout the whole chat today, but I saw a great post on your Instagram looking at the difference between like chronic toxicity and then like a more acute toxicity. Could you go into that for our listeners? And also, I guess this comes from the perspective of, small steps for like long-term health versus having to please go into that.
Yeah, sure. Love to. So acute toxicity or acute exposures are when you are exposed a few times in a short period of time. And these type of exposures are typically reversible. So they don't usually cause a permanent effect unless you've poisoned yourself and died. Then of course, that's the worst outcome of an acute exposure. But generally speaking, acute is just one or a few times, a couple times, maybe even in a short span, like a month, 2 months or something.
What's an example that comes to mind?
Like if you use a perfume every once in a while, that's more of an acute exposure. If you're not using it over a long period, do you see what I'm saying? If you're just,
right, okay,
it's
so
just
using
acute,
a perfume only on like okay, so that's what you mean by acute. I was thinking like acute as in ingesting like mercury, like actual mercury.
Yeah, as well. But I guess I was thinking more in terms of what an everyday kind of acute exposure would be.
Okay.
So that's like I microwaved in plastic for like a week. Maybe I was traveling for my job and I didn't have any other options. That's an acute exposure, right?
Gotcha.
The chronic is when, kind of what Alice was mentioning, you keep doing it for over and over and over for months, years, decades. That's kind of what you're looking at. And usually when it comes to chronic, sometimes the effect can be irreversible. So meaning if you expose yourself to a carcinogen every day for 10 years, it may become irreversible when you get the cancer, if that makes sense. Whereas if you stopped earlier, then you might not have gotten the cancer, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. And chronic exposure is what's most relevant, what makes the most sense for everyday exposure for us through our makeup, our food, water, those kinds of things. That's chronic exposure. So it's usually these little bits here and there, low doses, but usually coming from a lot of different sources. So the amount from one product may not be that much, but if you're using 10 products with that toxic chemical in it, then it can become more hazardous, right?
And especially for women, for example, using skincare, right? So you've got your cleanser, then moisturizer, then serums, then foundation, then mascara and eyeliner, and all of it's all layering on top of each other, right?
That's right. So there was a study by the Environmental Working Group. They said the average woman applies 168 chemicals every day.
Ooh.
And of course, again, everything's a chemical. Hey, like technically water's a chemical, right? But we're talking hazardous chemicals.
Yes, some hazardous, some not hazardous, right? So like, for example, fragrance is everywhere. Skincare, it's in our oral care, hair care, makeup. Like, why does lipstick have fragrance? I don't know, but I've seen it. I mean, probably because the ingredients are cheap and it smells bad. That'd be my guess. But nonetheless, it's in everything. So if you've got fragrance and then each one of those fragrances has a little bit of phthalates in it, so then you're slathering just like phthalates all over yourself. That's kind of what's happening, where that 168 number kind of comes from. It's like every product probably has about 10 to 20 ingredients in it, right? Some of them have the same ingredients over and over and over and over. So that's kind of the problem.
That's great. You mentioned the number. Are there any specific numbers? Obviously there's lots, but are there any standouts that you recommend, like number wise, people can flip over a product like a skincare and look for?
You mean a number of ingredients or
number, like a certain like chemical code or like ingredient? I guess that's more so in food, isn't it? But like, is there certain names that the people should be looking out for and avoiding?
Oh yeah. So there's so many. Let me back up.
Let's just go
So-
top 5 or something.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So sodium lauryl sulfate or
Yeah.
sodium lauryl sulfate, SLS, super irritating. It can strip the skin's oil barrier. It can cause like irritation, all these problems. That's one. So that's really common in laundry detergent. It's in hand soap, dish soap, shampoo. So anything that foams, that's sort of the surfactant, the foaming agent. The second one I would highly recommend avoiding are glycols. So glycols are, they use them for a lot of different reasons in skincare products, but just be on the lookout for those because they can cause a lot of also irritation and sensitization to the skin. And PEG, that's number 3, PEG, and usually has a number after it. PEG can cause a lot of different issues. One of them being that they can actually, like under certain circumstances, release formaldehyde, which leads me into number 4, which are formaldehyde releasing ingredients. These are usually preservatives. And they're not even needed because there's so many other preservatives that don't release formaldehyde because formaldehyde's a carcinogen. Why? You know, what is the reason? I mean, usually it's because of low cost and more profit. And number 5, I would highly recommend avoiding, if you can, synthetic silicones. That one might be controversial for some people because I know they're in like pretty much every product. But if you can avoid them, they're kind of just cheap fillers. And there's low tox, more natural silicone replacements out there. So you can avoid those pretty easily. And usually what silicone does is definitely on the hair, it can cause a lot of buildup. So if you ever switch to a more natural shampoo, for example, and you have that adjustment kind of detox period where your hair might get super greasy, some people say, and I don't have any solid evidence for this, but it's some of those chemicals being purged out of your scalp. Some of that buildup, if that makes sense. But it does kind of make sense, right? Like when you switch away from something that has like the sodium lauryl sulfate that's super harsh on your scalp, and then you're going for something that's more gentle, that you're leaving behind more of your natural oil. So your hair might feel greasy at first, but give yourself a couple weeks, use, dry shampoo or something if you can get through that period, because it's your scalp oils balancing themselves out.
Which is a good thing in the long run. Yeah.
100%.
I was actually just thinking like the other day whether my dry shampoo was a good idea and if there was any chemicals in there.
It really depends. So if you have a dry shampoo that is in a shaker bottle that you apply directly to your scalp, your
Like a powder.
Yeah, a powder. That's right.
Powder, yeah.
So if you've got the aerosol spray, I don't recommend those because the propellants that are used in there, petrochemicals, and also the fact that you're kind of just like spraying it all around your head. So like what I want to recommend for people is pay attention to how you're using these products. So if you're spraying anything around your face, around your hair that can be inhaled, try to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah.
So if you're dead set on using an aerosol dry shampoo, if you can, go outside.
Hold your breath.
Do you
Hold
know
your
what I'm saying? Hold your breath and go outside if you can.
And then go
Open
outside.
a window. Yeah. And then go. Exactly. Try not to breathe it in is my key. The key takeaway.
Yeah. So true.
I know that we obviously are running a bit over time, but I also just wanted to bring one thing up that I feel like might be relevant for the listeners. But would you suggest also when it comes to our choices in food that going organic would also help pesticides and that sort of thing and those types of chemicals? Will they also have the same effect? Do you know hormonally?
Definitely. So there are some hormonally active pesticides that are being used. So the more organic that you can go, the better in general.
Yeah.
But again, don't freak out if you can't eat everything organic because it might not be sustainable for some people's budget. Just try to do as many whole, minimally processed or unprocessed foods as you can and try to cook at home. That's
And
really
wash
the
your
key.
veggies.
Yeah. So wash your veggies. You can do a baking soda soak.
Mhm.
I don't remember the exact proportions, but if you just put some baking soda in water and soak your veggies, it can actually help take away some pesticides. So if you can't buy
True.
organic, then that can really help. That's one way. But trying to avoid the processed foods because that's really where you're going to get a lot of the chemicals in, even if it's organic.
Yeah.
Does baking
Just the
soda work?
yeah.
Does baking soda work similar to charcoal, like how it pulls things out? Yeah,
I
I might be maybe wrong, but it doesn't charcoal help pull, like, for example, gases or scents out of the air, and it absorbs them? And
yeah,
it can do
right.
that in the digestive tract as well. Some people say that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So charcoal, I think, works differently than the baking soda, because the baking
Okay.
soda, I think, is having more of a chemical reaction as
Okay.
opposed to absorbing.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's kind of breaking it down at the chemical level.
Okay.
I think,
Yeah, that's
by the
cool.
way, like for our Aussie listeners, that berries are the biggest one here in terms of the amount of pesticides, in terms of how many pesticides are actually on the food. They are at the top of the list. And I know that so many people, they just grab their strawberries out of the container and they just eat them without even washing them or anything, even especially if they're not organic as well. So just be aware of that. I used to do that. So.
And actually, that's a really good point. When it comes to washing, like, what's required? Does it need to get them off? Is it like it needs 30 seconds to warm water or hot water? Like, what's the best actual process for what is washing? Because, like, under the tap for 5 seconds, is that washing, or does it need to be a proper certain temperature or certain duration to get the nasties off?
I think you would want to go at least a minute. Running water is the key. I think the running water, because that's, physically pulling things off, but really washing by water alone is not enough. So that's where the baking soda sort of soak comes in. It's like the longer it's in contact. And so what I would do is, personally, I would probably rinse like under running water for about a minute or so. Then I would soak in the baking soda and water solution. And then I would rinse again. I'd rinse again.
Enough then.
Yeah, I would recommend that. Just, to definitely, the first couple seconds will take away the dirt and all, the physical particles.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a little bit longer to wash off the pesticides, because typically pesticides are oil soluble. So they're fat soluble. So it's not really necessarily going to come off in water anyway.
No.
Right. So that's why
in what it's grown, right? Like they used to grow the food. Hence why, even if it is not organic, like it might not be on top, it might be in the food, for example, like you said. So yeah. I did want to mention, so I actually have a fruit and veggie wash from Koala, which is like an Australian made non-toxic based cleaning company. And so they do like they do all sorts of cleaning products, but they also have a fruit and veg wash, in case anyone.
That sounds good.
Oh yeah, that does sound good. I've actually used one that kind of has a vinegar in it and a really mild detergent kind of soap. I believe if you Google, I think there are recipes out there where you can make your own veggie wash if you can't afford to buy it in the store.
It'll be cheap.
And I think yeah, and I think it uses some just like soap, very simple ingredients, soap, vinegar. At least that's what in the product that I bought, that's basically what's in there. And it does make a big difference. You can see like the wax comes off of apples. It's like it looks totally different after you've washed it.
I was wondering as well, like, it is important to look at both sides of the story or both ends of the spectrum, right? But isn't there a whole movement around, some people saying that, you don't need to eat organic vegetables? And are they, like, at what perspective are they coming from more of a nutritional perspective compared to a toxicity perspective? Like, looking at do you know much about that side of the argument?
Yeah, I've actually seen that. There's some accounts that I've seen as well. And I think it really just depends kind of what the affiliations of the person are. So when I used to work in the chemical industry, I was definitely on the side of, so there's this concept called the dose makes the poison in toxicology, meaning the more you're exposed to, the worse off you'll be. But that's not always the case, because with these PFAS chemicals and hormone disruptors, they are active at very, very low doses. And they're actually less active at higher doses. So it's complete opposite of the classical toxicology mindset. So it goes against the grain. And so it was really hard for me actually to adopt or even consider that my environment is causing my health issues. Because I'm like, wait, this is not what I learned. But once I had a personal experience and I was like, hey, I need to actually look at things differently, because what I've been doing is not working. So I had to switch my mindset. So it really depends. When I was in industry, then I was definitely more on the industry side, all chemicals are safe sort of mindset. So it really just depends. I mean, some people they just are really dead set on trusting the science, but the science isn't perfect anyway.
And the science is done a lot of the time to prove a point, in which is made to make money, in which is going to benefit someone. So, you know, and
You
also,
said it.
yeah, and also
100%.
it's, you know, it's not, like you said, most of the trials and things, they can be passed off as safe, but that might be for like a couple months of a trial, not for someone who's going to be then going and using this for years or doing this for years after that. So it's very, I guess, case in case for every different thing, right? But it's something to be aware of personally, so you can make more of an informed choice, right, around whether you want to
100 million%. You said it so perfectly, because literally even the tests that they do run, I mean, I'm a scientist. I used to run these tests. You can definitely have human bias. So like
100%.
how you design the experiment. If you're testing on animals, rats are not humans. So there's going to be a disconnect, you know? And even if they didn't find something that was toxic in animals, like it could happen in people. It happens all the time. I mean, that's why there are so many drug recalls, so many side effects from medications, because they don't usually find out the side effects until they go into clinical trials, which is pretty frightening. But nonetheless, I don't want to, you know, dissuade people against, you know, whatever medication they're using. That's not my point. My point is that the science is not perfect, like you said, and it can definitely be influenced and used to push an agenda. I mean, I was in industry. I used to publish papers on behalf of my company. So, you know, I know what it's like. And it happens. So the people who say, oh, eating organic, it doesn't matter. You know, again, if you can eat organic, better, bonus points. If you can't, you're still getting at least minimally processed food. That's the key.
Yeah. And like you said, it's the angle that they're taking, right? So you might have two capsicums side by side, one's organic, one's not. And like the carbohydrates and vitamins and minerals but might be quite similar. So from a nutrition perspective, from that angle, they're identical potentially, or really close, but they're completely pushing aside the effects that, the toxins could have on the body. And it's not like, it just depends on the agenda, right? So
so it's kind of like they're just leaving out certain bits of information. So if you see someone that says, oh, well, you don't have to be afraid of formaldehyde because formaldehyde is found in pears. Well, pears also have antioxidants, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and other things that help you to detoxify that formaldehyde. And actually the formaldehyde is in such a tiny amount in that pear compared to, for example, what you would get in a shampoo. So it's comparing apples and oranges. You can't say that it's the same because formaldehyde is found in pears. It's naturally occurring that it's okay for you. It's totally different. Like they're kind of just like, I don't know what that technique is called, but it's kind of a psychological concept where they try to distract you like, hey, look over here. But they're kind of not telling you the whole picture.
I just watched a documentary specifically on glyphosate. Do you know much about glyphosate? And so I've been kind of looking into that. Do you know, like, do you have an opinion or anything on that personally?
Yeah, I avoid it as much as I can.
Yeah.
So
that's sort of the angle that I picked up from what I sort of researched as well. So
where is glyphosate found? What's it common?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Everywhere. So a lot of it is used in wheat, in grains.
Okay.
Some oat brands,
in grains.
for example. There's some oat brands.
Oats.
So I get organic oats as well.
So used as a preservative or used as a, like, how's it used?
So it's used as a pesticide or an herbicide.
Right. Okay. In the
get
growing
rid of
process.
The weeds in the growing process.
Gotcha.
But it's also used as a drying agent once the oats have already been harvested.
There you go.
So it's like you're getting it twice. And it's like, why do you need to use that? Like, I mean, it's cost saving.
Was it in rice
effective.
as well?
Rice, the issue more with rice is arsenic, heavy metals that come from the soil, not necessarily the pesticides as much. But if you can eat organic rice, it's better for you just from that heavy metal perspective and also from the pesticides. But it is in almost everything. So it's in the US, it's called Roundup.
Yeah.
So they use it on corn, soy, beets. Those are the main. I think potatoes as well, grains. So it's pretty much in the entire food supply. So if you can avoid it as much as you can, try to go for organic.
Yeah. I mean, so little changes like that. For example, I'm an oats girl. I am an oats girl.
I am not anymore.
but you know, I like, it was a simple switch for me. Like after I had sort of actually looked at the label, read about the brands, I was like, oh, well, now I'm going to just go for this brand instead. Simple switch, because I have it every day, most days. So yeah, knowledge
that's a
power,
smart choice.
right?
That's right. Smart choice. See, the things that you eat frequently, the things that you like, for example, the makeup that you use frequently, the perfumes, those are the exposures that can really start to add up. So if it's just every once in a while, like for me, I'll use a perfume once a year, for that. So that's not going to push the needle forward, right? In terms of my toxic burden. But if you're doing it every day, multiple times a day, like try to clean up those ones as much as you can.
Yeah. And there are some really good, high quality, more natural, brands out there for makeup and skincare, like Arbonne. One of our friends sells Arbonne, but yeah, it's a really high quality one. So
yeah, even just any improvement is an improvement. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you're not feeling anything, if you start to feel some reaction, then you might want to take a little bit closer of a look, right? You're like, okay, something's irritating me. For example, I use these makeup wipes, I don't want to name the brand, but I use them for many years. It's like, one of the name brands. And one day my eyes just blew up. They got swollen. And I traced it back to some of the ingredients in there. So yeah, you can form these kind of allergic reactions over time. So if you start to notice any kind of like tingling or tightness on the skin, that's not a good sign.
Yeah. Sunscreen. Sorry, just needed to add that in there too. Think about
sunscreen.
Sunscreen.
Yeah, I know that's a huge.
every possible thing we can just make people aware of, I guess, because you know what, when I was back in school, that whole thing came out about sunscreen and links to cancer, and everyone was like, oh yeah, right, like that's not going to happen. And then now you look on and see that they've been recalled, certain brands, for those specific chemicals in sunscreen, and so you think like, ooh, that was like 10 years ago that I first heard about it, but it's not until now that they're finally like taking it off the shelf and saying, actually, if you have this at home, stop using it. So again, it's just that awareness, right?
It's like when you know better, you can do better.
Exactly.
So like, don't beat yourself up if you're not perfect. There's no way you could be perfect anyway, and better to do something than nothing. So I think some people are, if you're a perfectionist type person and you don't want to do it unless you can do it 100%, then that's actually going to keep you stuck, right? So just do one thing at a time.
So true. It's never going to be perfect. We just got to do our best. So
that's right.
Thank you so much for joining us, Yvonne. That was so cool. I love going into all of that. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for having me.
Where would the best place be for our listeners to find you to go deeper into these topics or follow along on your journey?
At Dr. Yvonne Burkart on Instagram. That's the best place you can find me. I'm super active on there. I'm starting to pick up some traction on TikTok too. So you can also find me there. Dr. Yvonne Burkart.
Amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No worries. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, everyone. And as we always say, take a screenshot, share it with your friends to grow our Body and Beyond community, and just jump onto our show notes to check out how to get in touch with Yvonne, to follow her very, very helpful information going forward. And we hope you enjoy this episode, guys. We'll see you in the next round.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Cool. I'll leave it recording for a sec. Thanks, Yvonne. I had one more question. Because of our age group and like I feel like some of my friends are trying to get pregnant at the moment as well. Would you say that there's direct correlations between infertility but basically pregnancy taking longer and all this toxic load?
100%.
Yeah.
So the rate of infertility has gone up, not only because women are waiting longer to get pregnant, but also because it's taking longer to get pregnant. So you can try to start earlier, but some people are taking, over a year, and that's considered clinically as infertility if it takes you more than a year. So definitely.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it's
Because I got pregnant within a few months of cleaning up my products and my lifestyle.
Wow.
So pretty dramatic change.
And just because I don't know, but what's the actual, like, what's actually happening? What's the barrier? Like, is it like affecting the estrogen in the woman, or it's like affecting, like, how does it affect the infertility directly?
Oh, it can affect anything along the reproductive axis. So starting from the brain, it can affect the hypothalamus, the pituitary, it can affect your ovaries, it can affect the uterus, it can affect the process of ovulation, the process of implantation.
Yeah.
It can affect so many things. And if you're really inflamed and you have your immune system is kind of going crazy, then that can also cause your immune system to attack the baby because it's got, like half foreign DNA. And it can also come from the male side as well, right? So low sperm quality, low sperm count, low testosterone. Men are super affected by endocrine disruptors, and they really need to look into this. So if there's male factor infertility, look into that. Look into cleaning it up.
He's very into men's health, and he researches a lot around testosterone in general and how the decline of testosterone has happened over the last however many years, like how it's just literally plummeted. And now when you go to the doctor and they say, well, you're in normal range, that's actually not normal range anymore. It's 100%. Normal range for these days, but not from what males actually were before, all of these changes to our lifestyle occurred. So it's quite shocking when you look at the timeline of things.
Yeah, you can actually kind of trace it with the introduction of a lot of industrial chemicals. That's when diseases start going up, fertility starts going up, right? So there's so much correlation there. You can't argue against it anymore. But of course, like you said, there's still people that try.
Yeah.
And this may sound like a silly question, or just I'm trying to understand more, but how it can affect the whole, like, the whole hormone system from the brain, like you said, all the way down to the actual organs. But like, what actually happens to the cell? Like, does it just not function as well? Does it not fire? It doesn't what actually happens? Like, is it like numbing their functionality? Like what actually happens?
Yeah, that's actually a good way of putting it. So they can shut off the enzymes that you need to make certain hormones. It can actually bind to the hormone receptors on the cells that usually wouldn't have, so for example, if you have excess estrogen, then you're getting more estrogen binding to the cells that shouldn't be there. So it's either causing the cells to misfire, or it just basically causes them to either shut down or get overactive.
Okay.
Wow.
And then
the overactive is like the cancer, right? The
I was about to
overactive
say, when
is the
some
cancer.
cells are overactive, that's when they're duplicating and have the dodgy cells and cancerous cells. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, I love that word, dodgy.
Dodgy. So dodgy. Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
So cool.
Yeah. So if your friends are looking to get pregnant, highly recommend getting hormones tested. If they can work with a naturopath, it's even better, because usually what they'll do is recommend lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
Changes to your diet, changes to your environment, your home life. Stress management is huge. That's one that was really big for me. So when I got really sick, I was in my high pressure corporate job. So it was really crazy. But once I started adding more stress management in, then the lifestyle and the low tox products, I could really see a big difference there. Yeah. So definitely tell your friends, like, the stress part is going to really affect your fertility in general.
Yeah. My husband and I haven't started trying, but we're going to start trying next year, but hopefully everything's okay, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Good luck. Best of luck.
To do a little low toxing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think we're definitely in the right direction already, but I'll even amplify it more after this discussion. Like, there's still heaps of things for sure. So cool. Thanks, Yvonne.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. This was super cool.
Yeah.
The Body and Beyond podcast is for information purposes only. This podcast does not constitute advice or services, and the statements and views of the hosts and guests are not medical advice. The information provided should not be used for treatment or diagnosis purposes. Please discuss any information from this podcast with your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle.